Hello, my name is Jo Palmer and I am the founder and the managing director of Pointer Remote. So we're a company that is passionate about supporting businesses and individuals from all over Australia, particularly in rural areas, to leverage remote work. So we support businesses to grow their teams and individuals to re-enter the workforce or to upskill in remote. We also work with communities themselves to support them to attract and retain population and to increase economic development in their area. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Jo Pilon from Expand Careers. And Jo, I have been doing some work with over the years, and she is just such an exciting person to, we're going to drill down into that, but to really have today, because she really has got this amazing insight into jobs, work, rural Australia, combination of all of the above, as well as a really interesting insight into what employers are looking for, but also how people that are looking to either re-enter the job workforce or to change careers and those sorts of things. She's got some really interesting knowledge and things. So welcome, Jo. Very excited to have you. Do you want to give us a bit of an intro to yourself? And I would love to hear like how you can go back. Tell us how you got to here, and then I'll harass you with questions.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. So I'm a career counsellor and employability skills coach. So I've had quite a varied career myself, and I've always lived in rural and regional areas, pretty remote areas most of the time. So I do understand sort of all the things that impact on people who are living in regional Australia and trying to create a career and also find a work in that space. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my story, which I know it seems funny telling your story, but anyway. So when I first left school, which was a long, long time ago, I went to college, and which was what uni was called in those days. So obviously I'm dating myself, and I just didn't really like it. I came from a really tiny little village, and I found it really difficult to settle in. There was no structure, all those things. So I left and got work, and didn't really like that either, but I was being paid, so that was great. and then, you know, a few years' time after I'd had my children, I decided I needed to go back to work. And so then I started looking for something that would suit my family. And I'd married a farmer, so had to suit the farm and my children. And so I was serendipitously talking to someone, as you do in small communities, and they said, oh, there's a job going at this school. And I went, right. So I went round and dropped my resume off, and I got that job, and I worked in the school library. And funnily enough, that had been the course I'd started when I left school. And so then I thought, great, I'm going to do this. And I looked into distance education, which was available then. And I did distance education in library science. And being in a small community, other jobs came up that once I'd sort of been studying for a while, and I did HR as my second major. So I became a service coordinator for home care, which I saw the ad in the local paper, just sort of emphasising all the ways that we used to do things. And then once I'd sort of worked in that field, and I'd just learnt so much, not only about health, but about managing people and all, and WHS, actually learnt so much about WHS. And then after that, I had finished my degree, and I thought, there was limited jobs in libraries. So I thought, I'll do some teaching. So I did some training in adult learning, and worked for TAFE for a while. And while I was at TAFE, someone said to me, oh, you're a librarian. Oh, our librarian, she doesn't have anyone to take her place when she goes on leave. And I went, oh, well, I'd do that. I'd travel. So I got the casual work, which was meant to be for a month, turned into 6 months, then became permanent because they put the position up. And so I applied for the position. So I was there for about 15 years, and and I did so many other jobs within that. So once you're in an organisation, you're Johnny on the spot basically to see all the things that come out that might interest you. So I did a lot of tech sort of technology was being introduced. So in 2010, I started doing video conferencing and teaching teachers how to use video conferencing and Moodle learning platforms and all those sort of things. So I did that for a while. And then finally, my kids all finished uni, and I thought I can actually probably try to do something where I could stay home, because I used to have to travel 2 hours. And so then I did some more study. I did a grad certificate in careers education and development, and here I am. And then we moved. So now I'm not quite so isolated, but yeah, still regional.
Yeah. I think that your story, just listening to that, I think that either people watching this are like nodding saying, oh my gosh, that's me, or the likes of me, that I keep picturing my mother, and again, being in a rural town with small kids, with no childcare, no family support, all of those different challenges that you, like you said, you were jack of all trades, and you took jobs as they came up, and that was pretty much it. And you sort of, we were talking offline about that concept of like, well, farmers had to have their eye out for a teacher or a nurse because they were the fresh meat that came to town. And so other than,
yeah, cash flow.
yeah, and that that different job opportunities were far more either that came to people that were opportunistic in town, or that just were what physically happened in your town, and you were so physically restricted to where you lived unless you wanted to do a FIFO equivalent or be in the car, which I think is a really big reality for a lot of people, and a lot of people still. Fast forward, we see a very different rural Australia now.
Yeah.
I guess my question to kick you off with, I think that you are a careers coach. What are the sorts of the people coming to you? What sort of, not age, but what sort of stage are you talking to a lot of people? Are you talking to them as they finish high school? Are you talking to them as they finish babies? Are you talking to them when they're like, at what sort of stage do you see, or is it a big spectrum?
It's interesting. I probably have three main age groups, I guess, or stages in life, and that's where I think with women particularly, we have stages in life much more so than men. Because we have the children, and often we stay home with the children. So I'm seeing mums that have still got their children at home, and either single mums or just thinking, I need to change. I need to have a career that's flexible, that I can find it a satisfying career. So it's not even, when I was young, it was much more about you just got a job. There was a number of us went to uni, but we weren't the majority, or even wanted a career. Most just went and got a job, and they were happy doing that. And then as things developed, they might have gone in and got a career later, like I did. But now I think people are more inclined to go to university, but the career they choose initially may not suit a family or suit the lifestyle they end up having. So if you're in a regional space, you are limited by your geography in a way. But now that it's actually what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this thing, technology has just opened the doors for us, because we are now able to have like remote work, or when we study, we can do remote study, and it's still interactive. We're still got a community. When I was doing my first lot of study, basically, it was exciting, but I got books in the mail and I would read it. So, I'd be reading all the readings, but I could go online and order my books. That was a big thing, but in the day, and I used to sit at the computer with a book reading while I was waiting for things to download. So it's so different now. And so I think that technology has just opened the doors for us all. And so people in that stage where they've got a family to consider, they're probably often thinking about re-careering, or I don't know whether you'd say that re-careering, but you know what I mean, and restudying, doing something different. And that's interesting, because then they can often build on their career. So I can help them with course choices, even down to working out what's your best option. Are you better off doing, you know, like a grad dip or something, and then moving on to your master's? So it's staged because they've got to think about their lifestyle.
Mm.
And if you are married to a small business person or a farmer, then they've got all those added responsibilities as well. So there's so much to consider when you're going to take on, you know, study.
Yeah.
And then I also, one of my markets that has really opened up has been people planning to retirement. Because we now are working till we're 67, and there's a lot. It's actually quite sad because there's a lot of women, particularly, and I think I see a lot more women than men, but there's a lot of women, particularly, that are in that age bracket, and they've had a divorce, and so they haven't actually got a lot of super. As this is all the things that we hear about on the news, and so they're planning. They need to plan for not only economically, they need to plan energy-wise, because as you get older, you've been working, you've raised your children, you've done all those things. Then you've gone through a very emotional time with a divorce, and so often, and it's not always a divorce, but you know, often it is in the people I see, and so they actually need to. They've still got, you know, maybe 10 years of work to go. That's a huge investment of time, energy, and money. So they feel like they need to plan it, and then some of them do some extra study as well, just to keep. And another thing that as you get older is that you start to think, oh, technology is moving so fast, I've got to keep up with it because I don't want to look like I'm an older person in the workforce. So that's all the things that we talk about, and it's quite interesting. So then there's those two ends of the spectrum, and then you've got the people in the middle who's empty nesters. So their children go off to uni, and they can think, do I really want to do this anymore? So then they start thinking, So it's very interesting, the different groups.
So I guess in the last, I suppose because you've studied remotely, you've worked in a variety of different areas and institutions and small business and all of those things. What do you think, like, the biggest changes you've seen have been? Like, I know that everything has been put on super drive in the last, 2020 has been supercharging how things are looking, but what are sort of the changes, do you think, that for people in a rural area, so say not so much a bigger regional centre, but say a rural area, what do you think are the different, like, opportunities, and what sort of world is, how is the world looking different for them now, do you think?
I actually do think it looks really different. I come from a really small village, and so I moved away for a while, but I went back, and when I was growing up, there was probably 250 people, but there was shops, lots of shops. Now that little village is down to a pub, a post office, and a motel, garage, general store. So, and a school, still has a school, which is the only thing that I think that keeps it alive at all. So therefore, they have to travel, or they have to get remote work. And since the NBN's come and we have fixed wireless in our area, then that is much more feasible. So I think that's two really big impacts, is the move from really small centres. And I think that's because people travel now more. When I was younger, we didn't really go off to big centres to do our shopping. We went to maybe the next size centre, but now we're all happy to travel a couple of hours to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that was one thing. So that makes the job choices probably less. But then in our area, there's also been big mines opened up, so that's made that much better. Those job choices are better and more available. But I do think technology has made a huge difference. And I think that regional and rural people are really imaginative, and there's so many little businesses out there, and you know, like, I don't know, there's just amazing things that I look at sometimes and think, oh, I'd never have thought to do that.
Yeah.
But it's great. Like, people are just out there doing. And I think also now, I think with COVID, I think employers are actually really starting to think we can enable remote work.
Yeah.
Because I found when I worked in an organisation, the supervisors always did remote because they had teams dispersed everywhere. So they always did remote work, but they had a manager on the spot. But now I think that people further down the chain are starting to show that they can actually do remote work as well.
Mm. So I guess then this shift of where people previously, and it's not just restricted obviously to rural areas or rural towns, this is a thing that's happened globally in big metro areas as well. But for those people that have always gone to a physical job or physical location for work, what are the sorts of things, the advice, I guess, are you giving people that are transitioning or looking to actually start looking for work that's more flexible or in a remote capacity, or study? Because I think that, especially talking to you today, that is a really, they're very much intertwined, because that's the opportunity to access study is improving all the time. And I think that then increases the opportunity to access the different work. So what are the sorts of things that the advice that you're giving to people to start getting ready, like preparing for like doing this work in a different way? What sorts of things are you telling them to get their head around and get ducks in a row?
I think they need initially, I recommend that they talk to people. They talk to people who are already doing remote work, because if you haven't done something, often you just don't know what you don't know, if you know what I mean. So it's always good to just talk to that person who's been doing it. Obviously, your circumstances will be different, but you do need to know. You also need to know all the skills that you'll need as a remote worker. So if you don't find it easy to get motivated and be a self-starter, it'd probably be difficult to work remotely, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the tech skills, then you actually just need to, if you don't have the tech skills yourself, you probably, depending on what type of tech skills they are, if you say needed to make a website, you probably sub that out. But if you actually need to know how to log on to a webinar or something, then you need to learn those skills, because you have to have a fair range of, you have to be tech savvy, I suppose.
Yeah, willing to try new things, willing to actually have a go at it as well.
Actually, I think that's the big thing, isn't it? You've got to have that attitude of, I can learn it and I want to learn it.
Yeah.
So, and I've found, because I've worked in educational institutions and now as well as a career counsellor, I've found that you've really got to have a lifelong learning attitude. And I think employers, that's one of the big things employers want. They want you to have that attitude that I can learn it. Yeah, I may not know it, but I will learn how to do it.
Okay, well, on that, give me some of the other things, I guess, the soft skills, or if you want to sort of talk about what soft skills are for those people that sort of like they hear it and are not sort of all that clear on what that means. So what soft skills are, and what sorts of things are really important when you are working for someone or an organisation remotely.
Yep. Okay. So of course, working remotely is really quite different to working for someone, because you haven't got, you have got accountability, but you haven't got someone looking over your shoulder, and you haven't even got anyone to just have how do you do this sort of thing as easily as in a workplace. So soft skills are your interpersonal skills and your productivity skills. So things like communication, conflict resolution, although depending on who you're going to have conflict with if you're remote, depending on what your role is.
It can still happen, I promise. It can still happen in a big way.
I'm sure it can. Yeah, actually I could tell you a story about that one, but yes. And then things like, what else is there? Oh, well, yeah, your lifelong learning. That's also a soft skill. Being able to use digital cameras and all that sort of stuff, even though that's often a technical skill, it's also sort of a soft skill. But I think when my daughter and I have done a bit of research on this, and the top one that we found just from looking at other doing the research was adaptability and flexibility. So, I mean, you're like that anyway in the workforce. I always found that we were, because you have to be a bit flexible in, you know, someone will come in and you have to put customer service first. But in a remote space, like, things can just change so quickly. You have to be organised and have time management skills, and that would lead to productivity. You have to have the tech savvy, as I said. You have to be motivated, self-motivated worker. Communication. So I think in a way, when you're working remotely, your communication skills have to be, well, particularly your listening and interpreting skills definitely need to be really well honed. And I think that goes both ways. I think as an employer or a supervisor, they would definitely have to have those sort of skills as well, because emails can be very, very easily misconstrued. So you would have to have those written communication skills as well. So you have to, and for me, I always read my emails numerous times before I'll send, not numerous, you know, like a number of times, because quite often you can have this thought in your head and you put it down on paper and you think it's right, but then the person reading it does not get that message.
Yeah, and they don't hear the tone. I saw this hilarious email from a woman that in her email signature says, don't be offended by my abrupt email, I'm Danish. Like, that's how, in every email, because she would, like, I think that's obviously a Danish trait for a lot of people, that they're quite straight to the point and there's no sort of fluffing. Australians are very good at, like, I find sometimes that I write an email with a question or a direction or something, and then I feel like, oh, I better go back and pad it out with some
That's what I do too.
But,
so you get your thoughts down, but then you've got to go and make it appealing.
Yeah. And this lady just, like, completely owned it and was like, no, that's not how I roll. Don't be offended by me just getting what I want from you or giving you what you need to keep moving. But I guess what we see a lot at Pointer Remote when we've got, especially, look, I hate to say especially women, but quite often it's women, but quite often it's people that have had a gap in their career and they're wanting to re-enter the workforce, and they that transferable skills. Look, I'm a teacher by trade, and I for years sort of thought, well, I have a teaching degree, I'm a teacher, that's what you do, you're a teacher. And I didn't sort of see all the skills that I built in my teaching career and the education part of my degree and career and those sorts of things, that how transferable they were to other jobs and running businesses and managing people and all of those things. What sorts of things do you say, or do you do activities or things to sort of get people to start thinking around, okay, what are the things that I've done in other jobs or in life itself? It doesn't always have to be work related, but that are then transferable skills that are really important to working remotely and that can be of real benefit. That how do you draw that out of people so that they can really put things into their resume that are going to like articulate and really showcase the things that they can do?
It's actually really hard for most people to do that, because they just, for starters, my favourite thing is they say, oh, I've just been.
Or
which I do myself, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need to get the detail out. So I have a skills audit that I get people to do, and you have that in your in that thing I sent.
Yep.
I've worked with you to do it. And that helps, because that actually starts getting people to identify, oh, so communication is important, and then your attitude's important, and how you like to work. Do you like to work on your own? Do you like to work with others? What your collaboration skills, all those things that employers look for is in this big list. It doesn't mean that you have to have every single one, but how I've thought, and I just do it because I talk to people and I tease it out of them. But when I was thinking about telling you about this, I'm thinking, I'll have to drill this down. So I've written it out so that I can clearly see. And so it's I write down, so I get people to write down the skill. Example, I resolved the conflict between people. So, if you're in a leadership position, you might need to resolve conflict, or even if you're just part of a team and you can see two people are not getting on, then you use skills like you're actively listening. You diffuse the situation by being calm all the time, things like that. And then I get them to detail all the things that they've done. And really break it down. And then I get them to give examples of how they've used that skill. So say they're say they say, oh yeah, I'm a project manager, or I just do projects. so then I'll go, okay, what do you do? Where do you start? So you start with getting all the resources together, or creating the Gantt chart, or however you might start. Visualize how it's going to be. We always say start it with the end in mind. So you start with what you want to finish at, and so you can then and you say I use Trello to do this, and this. So get all those details and break them down into examples of when you've done something. And then if there's been any feedback from anyone else, that's another good evidence that you can use in your application as well. And then do that. So if you were doing, say you said about project management, have a number of examples. Don't just have one, have a number. And then you can look at those examples and think, okay, that project, I did this, and this, and it was really successful. So that can validate that, yes, I'm pretty good at it. But then if you've got 2 or 3 examples of how you've managed a project and they've all been successful, or even if they haven't been successful, but you've gone back and analysed why they haven't, and then remedied it. Too busy talking. So that also highlights another skill, is that you're analysing and you're able to go back and work. So do you see what I mean? And so people wouldn't even recognise that they were using that analytical skill. But it is, if you're going back and reevaluating why your project didn't work for next time, then that's your analytical skills. And nothing always works all the time. So it's a learning behaviour as well. So you just break it down is probably what I can say. And use examples to demonstrate.
Yeah. So I guess that we get asked quite often about including voluntary work and things that you do in your community in your CV. And I think that that's a really interesting question and an interesting thing to sort of engage with. But I think you've sort of touched on it. But like, rather than saying, I'm on the P&C, I'm on the netball committee, and I am in the CWA, should you be drilling down into that more and actually looking at that, especially when you say I'm just a mum, or I've just been doing this? What are sort of things that with the stuff that you do in your community? Because I think that this is again quite a benefit for a lot of people that live in rural areas, is there's access to community groups for your community to function. It needs people participating in that. And so how can you capture that stuff that you do in your community and really push that as something to promote you into your career?
I do think, particularly if you're coming back into the workforce after a bit of a gap, that if you can put down that you've been in different voluntary positions, but then say, or talk about the responsibilities, basically treat it like a job. Talk about the responsibilities that you had. So you might have organised a fundraiser for the P&C and outline all those tasks that you did and how you worked with other people. Often there is that conflict between, different groups, particularly I find in volunteer groups. So you can talk about how you dealt with that. So break it all down once again. The details how people and employers can see that you've actually done the job. Because if you haven't done it, you haven't got that pertinent detail. And it also, and once again, like if you did do a fundraiser, say for the PNC, so we raised, put it in numbers, we raised $20,000 and in 4 weeks by doing this, this and this.
Yeah. Because I think that quite often is a bit of a trip up that people find. They're like, I know that it looks good that I do things in my community, that I am engaged and participating, and a potential employer can see that I'm part of a team and these sorts of things. But yeah, I think that really drilling down into the skills and the processes that go into that. Sometimes I think, do you think that, not that you want to treat your potential future employer like they're a bit of a ning-nong and don't know what these things are, but do you think that how explicit, how much detail are we needing to go into? Like, how are we sending off 15-page CVs?
No, they have to be about 3. I've actually been doing quite a number of job applications at the moment, sadly for people, and they're moving to cover letters. I don't know, but it used to be selection criteria in a lot of jobs. A lot of them now, it's 2-page cover letter, but you still have to address a lot of the criteria. So it has to be succinct. So I think when you're starting to try and work out what your skills are and how good you are at them, and because I think it's really important to be honest about that, because there might be skills that you actually do need to develop, particularly if you're moving to a different field like remote work. Then you need to be honest about those skills and think, okay, I'm really good at communication, but I'm not so good at technology, so I need to work on that. So it's an information session. It's not as though you have to tell everyone. You just have to know and identify that they're the things that you work on. But when you go into, you can't really, so when you start, you need to really give some detail, but then you have to condense that into a really interesting, succinct sentence. So I recommend you use action words to start your sentence. So decide, planned and, like, so if you were in the planning committee, planned with 3 other members, and make it really, boil it down to a 1-sentence thing if you can. And try to, in your application, we also recommend to put achievements, and a lot of careers advisors do recommend to put achievements. Try to make them a 1-sentence achievement that deals with a number of different skills. So, like, not necessarily 1 sentence but 1 sentence for each skill, or if you can put a few others in as well just to feed them in, would be great. But make it really succinct and clear what you've done and what you've achieved, and try to put numbers in, like, say for my example, online students using needed tutorials, retention rate went up 20%. So that's just sort of summed it up, what I did, what the problem was, so what your challenge or your problem was, what you did to fix it, what the result was, and how they benefited.
Yeah. So I want to move on a bit as far as, I suppose, preparing for interview and for, like, when you're getting, like, you've got past the first gatekeeper and you're doing this concept of interviewing. And if you're applying, like, this has obviously changed a lot in the last sort of 6 to 8 months, where a lot more businesses and organisations are open to remote work. They might be advertising the job being remote in the first place. Do you have advice around for people when they are trying to re-enter the workforce and there is a job that has been advertised in a physical office at a physical location, and it could be where you live or it could be not? Any advice around sort of how to broach, and when, at what stage to broach the fact that you would actually like to do this maybe in a hybrid way, that you're in the office sometimes and in a in at home the other times, or doing things fully remote. If it hasn't been explicitly advertised as flexible or remote, is there a trick or a time or a period or things where to sort of ask or start negotiating or planting the seed? Any sort of advice around that?
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about it. So, but I think in the application, I would just refer, like I would actually include how successful you've been, if you've had experience in remote work, how successful you've been in that.
But I suppose it's like that you're wanting to, rather than sneak your way through to a third interview and then say, by the way, I live in Broken Hill.
Yeah. So
Can I
think,
remotely?
do you know what I always recommend people to do? Is I always recommend give the employer or the person a ring and find out much more about what they want, and then it just breaks down some barriers if you do that. I've actually can give an example of when I had a client who missed out on an interview. He rang up to see why, because he felt like he was very qualified for it. And he had a good chat to the manager, and the manager then approached him 2 weeks later and said, would you like to come for an interview for this job? I really was impressed with you ringing up. So I really recommend ringing. And if you miss the job, I recommend ringing for that as well. So when you're talking to them, you could say, I think for me, if it was me, I would want to know if they were open to being remote. So I might suss that out in that phone call. But if I still thought I really, really want this job, I would still go for it and go for interview. And then in the interview, I would say, once I've answered their questions and they say that bit at the end where, have you got any questions? That's where I would say, so I live, oh no, I probably wouldn't even put it like that. I'd probably say, look, I really, really want this job. I'm really passionate about it, blah, blah, blah. And it would work so much better for me if.
Yeah. And I think that this is the thing that if we had been having this conversation even 12 months ago, would have been just like,
exactly.
And that was just so much of a challenge that so many people like literally sort of had to almost be like signing contracts before they'd then drop in like, oh, actually I live 500 kilometers away. And so then it was almost too awkward and uncomfortable for the organisation to be like, oh, we're going to have to look at this differently. But it's
in my way of thinking, I couldn't do that. I couldn't drop it on them then. That would be, I don't know, that to me, I think I'd have to talk about it prior to signing contracts anyway.
Yes, it's not really starting off on particularly a great.
No, I don't feel that. I would probably just put it, how flexible are you? And honestly, COVID, dreadful as it is, in many ways has opened people up to, and employers in particular, they were sort of hanging back, always wanting to see how their staff were working and wanting the cohesion, I guess, of a workplace. But honestly, I think it's really changed their minds. A lot of them anyway, not everyone, but a lot.
Yeah. I guess for people that are watching this that are feeling a bit sort of disenfranchised, so maybe they may have been recently let go or have just, their timing is just not fabulous as far as like, okay, I've been doing babies for 10 years and I'm ready to get into it, and it's a very interesting job market at the moment. Have you got say some hot tips, some 3 say key things to be thinking about, or just ideas around, even if it's around sort of building that confidence in people? Because I think that's a huge thing for people when you are out of the workforce, doesn't matter how long it is, or even if you're still in the workforce and wanting to change careers, that like that confidence piece is generally the roadblock, and that's
it really is.
Yeah,
it really is for so many people. So what I say for people, and I have actually done workshops on this, is My main advice is actually to get ready for the opportunity, because opportunities come, and if we're not ready for them, they go past us and someone else grabs it.
Mm.
So start thinking probably before, before you're 12 months, maybe even before you're wanting to get back into the workforce. Even if that's not the case, well, you can work with it, but my recommendation would be to do that. And then then maybe go and just do a little bit of study, or if you want to do work out whether you want to do a lot further study. If you're changing careers, you may have to. So work out what skills you've got, talk to someone impartial who can help you tease out what skills you've got, or and probably know, it's all about self-reflection as well. So you need to sort of work out what you would like to do and what suits your personality, and what suits your interest and your value system, and then start investigating how you can do it. And I think in times like this, where it's actually pretty competitive in the market, start looking at doing some research and start looking at organisations that you think you might like to work for, and see whether you would like to work for them. So, do research the organisation themselves, and then if you're getting prepared, you're also building confidence by going to do extra study or working out what skills you've got that can transfer, and then your confidence is growing, and so therefore when an opportunity comes along, you'll recognize it as an opportunity, not, oh my God, I'd love to do that, but I just can't at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I guess my last sort of thing that I am always really interested in, and it's been something that I've noticed over the last sort of 4 or 5 years as I have run businesses and spent lots of time traveling around, but also spending a lot of time in metro areas. What's your take on the concept of actually really celebrating and promoting your physical location in your CV? Like the fact that it's almost, I feel quite often when I'm participating in events or in workshops or training or things in a metro area, quite often I'm the only person from a rural area in the room, and I have very much embraced that as something that I celebrate very loudly, but also that I leverage and use to my advantage. Like that I have a different perspective on things. I think about things differently. Yeah. Do you think there is benefit in drilling down into that aspect of people's lifestyle or personality or physical location as far as a selling point for them?
I definitely do with when you're in business. I mean, I'm doing the same. My whole focus is on rural and regional. So, and not that I would not work with people from the city, but my focus is that. So I definitely think if you're in business and that's your identity, I think, and it's sort of become your brand, hasn't it, Jo? So yeah, so I think in that case, yes. I also think if you're going to do that, like if you're doing your resume, just putting your address on there is not going to be, anything. You've got to promote it. You've actually got to explain why it gives you a different perspective. And so you've got to go into detail. And I think that's probably the big thing that's coming through, isn't it? That you actually got to explain to people. And even when you go, so for anyone who's working remotely, a lot of people are business owners working remotely, small business. Would that be the majority of the people in your database? Would they be small?
No, we have just such a broad range of people, like of people, job seekers and individuals themselves. But I sort of think, I know that you sort of over the last 12 months, we see things like buy from the bush, and where businesses I can see are leveraging that. My question and sort of thoughts around that is that something that that individuals who are looking to access the workforce, like, is that something to promote? Like the fact that I'm just sort of thinking about sort of say 2 target audiences, if they're looking at organisations that are also regionally or rurally based, that they can promote that the fact that I live here, I live in a community like this, I understand the way and small business works. And then on the other side of things, that if they are applying for a job in a big organisation or a corporate or a metro-based organisation, that promotion of the fact that, okay, I have a rural background. These are the skills that I've picked up in a rural community, because I'm like very focused on community and being involved and those sorts of things. I just was interested to think,
Yeah, I do think
something that
you
you
could.
think you could leverage.
You could definitely leverage it, but I think you have to leverage it, if you know what I mean. You
Yeah.
actually have to give the reason why. I also think that rural people who come out and get a rural career, say for an organisation like the council or something, quite often they have really got a bigger scope of work than if you're in a big city council where the jobs are very narrow, and because there's so many people. And I know I interviewed someone, it was a couple of years ago now, I suppose, and she had come out to the mine as a trainee, but because the mine hadn't been able to fill this other position, she was actually doing another different position that she wasn't qualified for, like a promotions officer actually. So she was doing that as well. And so she was just learning this huge range of skills that she would then be able to put in her CV that she's, had this amazing, and she was from the city. And so she actually felt that it was really beneficial to her to come out to the regions and get a feel of, of a different way of life. And she was loving it too. But I definitely think that if you promote it the right way, then you could definitely use it as leverage. Yeah.
No.
And emphasize your community involvement, and I think that we're in regional communities, we have probably a reputation of resilience and working together and all of those things. So we could really emphasize those.
No, that's awesome. Okay, well, I always love chatting to you, Jo. Like, I always feel like psyched, and I'm excited for the people that get to work with you and things. Where is the best place if anyone would like to get in touch with you to find you online or around? What's the best way to get in touch?
I'll have to pull up my website just to make sure I get the address right. Isn't that terrible? So it's just, if you go to expandcareers.com.au is my web address, and I have a Facebook page as well. Instagram, I think, is Jo Pilon, and I have a LinkedIn profile, Joanne Pilon.
Fabulous.
Maybe Jo Pilon, maybe Jo. Can't remember.
That's
dreadful, isn't it, for someone who does resumes?
Expandcareers.com.au to track you down. Look, Jo, I really appreciate your time, and I really, thank you. It's always really interesting to get a different perspective on things. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been very enjoyable, Jo. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for coming.